trying to make the pieces fit to a puzzle with a million missing pieces. When I'm feeling fine is when I discover that I'm afraid to blow my cover, and there's something very wrong with this. So slip back in your hole, or get back in your cave. If I'm going down, I'm taking someone with me.
So, obviously we're not going to solve the question today. I don't know why that's on my screen. We're not going to solve the question of why crap pops up on my screen, and we're not going to solve the question of whether we're good by nature or only because we are constrained. Are we cursed? Are we condemned to curse our own goodness because we're only good at the barrel of a gun? Or is there something good in us? But it's something worth thinking about. And it is the first thing that is discussed in the first textbook for our course, Moral Choices by Scott Rae. So with this lesson, we're entering into the official first module of this course, which is about the foundations of ethical thinking. So I want to introduce Dr. Rae to you and say a few things about what you'll be reading in this first module of the course. So this is Dr. Scott Rae.
Destiny Pareda, please report to the front office. Destiny Pareda, please report to the front office. Thank you.
This is Dr. Scott B. Rae. He's an ethicist, a theologian, an Old Testament scholar, a professor of philosophy at Biola University in La Mirada, California. He has his PhD from University of Southern California. But PhD, that's your doctorate. And when it's in philosophy, you don't say PhD in philosophy because the PH stands for philosophy. Little trivia for you. His specializations are biomedical ethics and business ethics. He's the author of many books over the years, and the one we'll be working with is Moral Choices. As you'll come to find out about Dr. Rae, he takes a firm stance on one of the most important questions in all of ethics, and that is ethics or is morality objective or subjective? When I make a moral claim, am I making a claim of fact or of feeling, opinion? When I say it is evil to murder, am I saying something that is true the way it's true that Ken's shirt is blue? Or am I saying something more like vanilla is better than chocolate, or Nirvana's the best band of all time? Something that is that is not in the realm of fact. He comes down firmly on the side, you'll find out, he never tires of reminding you, he comes down firmly on the side of objective. The moral claims are factual claims, that what is right, what is wrong, and that it's not just a matter of feeling and opinion, that ethics are not subjective. One of the things you'll want to do as you read his work is decide for yourself whether he is effectively supporting that claim that he makes. Is he making a compelling, convincing case? It's one thing to argue that we need for morality to be objective. We need for murder to be wrong to live together in a society. It's one thing to claim that. It's another thing to claim that murder actually is wrong, because we need for there to be no cancer and no AIDS and no hurricanes. But there's cancer, AIDS, and hurricanes, or like giant AIDS, cancer, hurricanes, or whatever. The universe hasn't asked us what we need. So always make sure when you're listening to his claim that you're not letting him get away with distracting you by saying something like, where would society be if ethics weren't factual? And that he's always establishing his claim. That's the most effective way to read any ethical theorist. So I'm not just picking on Dr. Rae, who's written a very good book. It's not an unbiased book, but I don't mean biased in necessarily a negative sense. He has a perspective, and he's arguing for his perspective. So he doesn't do what I do, where my perspective is in the background and I rarely reveal it. He is actively arguing for his own perspectives on these topics, but he will also introduce you to alternate theories and alternate perspectives. And he does so in a way that's generally fair. He doesn't straw man his opponents. We familiar with that term, straw man? Okay, so to make a straw man argument, it's a logical fallacy. If I disagree with Camila about something, okay, and I want to convince you I'm right, it's very tempting for me to tell you about Camila's ideas and make them sound as stupid as possible. To give you the weakest, most inaccurate version of Camila's idea, make her look dumb, make me feel good, and then I win the argument, only I don't, because I've not generated any new knowledge in this conversation. I've defeated a phantom, a shadow, a straw man. The best way to operate in an argument when weighing two positions is to take the position you don't agree with, take Camila's position, and don't make it sound dumb, make it as strong as possible. In philosophy, that's called a steel man, or steel manning the opponent's argument. And since it's already called steel man, I couldn't help but change it to Iron Man. So we want to Iron Man the arguments we don't agree with, which means before we decide we don't agree with them, make the best, strongest possible case for the opponent's argument. And then one of two things will happen. It could be that in the process of making the strongest case possible for the opponent's arguments, we will, oh, we're good. I'm trying to look at the clock and figure out what time. We're fine. It may be that in trying to make the strongest case possible for the opponent's arguments, I will realize I'm wrong. And as much as we don't like that, every time we realize we're wrong should be a cause for celebration. Because now that means today I can be less wrong. Now I can move closer to a life devoted to actual truth. Or if I Iron Man her arguments, build the strongest case for it, and still come away convinced of my own position, I've made my own position stronger. Because it has stood up not against the flimsy strong man, but it has stood up against the iron Camila. And iron sharpens iron. Does Scott Rae Iron Man the arguments of his opponents? Sometimes. Very few are consistent in doing that. You're not always going to hear from him the strongest version of the ideas he doesn't disagree with. Sometimes you will, but you're not going to get a straw man either. You're always going to get a fair presentation of alternative theories. And the way I tested that out, I won't tell you what the issue was, but there's an issue he covers in here where I disagree with him. So I read what he said, and then I read how he described a position that's a lot closer to my own position. And I walked away saying, I think I could use the way he described my position to defeat his arguments for his own. So if he's painting my position that he disagrees with in a strong enough light that I think it still stands, I think that's a good sign that he is a fair author. I do want to point out one thing in the text. As you're reading the first chapter, which is one of the things you'll be reading over the coming few days, when you get to page 25 on the first chapter, he's making a point about the relationship between religion, specifically Christian faith, and the state and government. And he says something that's not exactly false, but citing another scholar, what's the other scholar's name? Citing another scholar, he sort of paints a picture. The other scholar is James Reckley of the Brookings Institution, it looks like. He sort of paints a picture of the founding fathers in the United States as people who, definitely don't want to make an official state church or force religion on people, but of the founding fathers as being very open to the active input of religious leaders to advise the inner workings of government. He's not wrong and he's not lying, but it's more complex than that, so I want to offer a counter to that. The founding generation, well, first of all, he's absolutely right that Christianity is fundamental to Western civilization and has hugely impacted every aspect of Western civilization. That's why I listed as one of the 6 things that everybody should know about. And he's right that the majority of Americans have always been Christians, and he's right that many of the founding fathers would acknowledge the positive role that private religion has on the moral conduct of people's personal lives. But the most influential of the founding fathers, Jefferson, Washington, Franklin, Adams, Madison, they wouldn't want religious leaders anywhere near the halls of power. And though there were traditional Christians in the founding generation, the most important of the founders weren't. They were deists. They believed in God, but didn't think God actively intervened in human life. And they were explicit in trying to make sure that religion had as little impact on the government as possible. It was the next generation, the generation after the founders. We won't get into details, but there was a major religious revival in the country known as the Great Awakening in the generation right after these fellows were dead, or when these fellows were super old. That from that point on, all through the 1800s, most of your leaders in government were very active in a traditional Christian sense with the faith, and you do see a lot of Christian influence on government policy. You don't get that in the late 1700s of the founding generation. So there's a little, I don't think he's not lying. I'm sure he could defend what he says, and he could find individual founders, you know. He could, maybe this guy and this guy and this guy were, but this guy and this guy weren't, and they're a lot bigger deal. Okay. For YouTube, that's all I need from you. And for those of you in class, we'll talk real briefly about the first reading and writing assignments, and then we'll be still several minutes early. Ken, thank you for your filmsmanship.